Hello, welcome back to the Well of Unusual. I'm your host, Chris, the Keeper of the Unusual, and today I have a guest actually on. Today's joining me is Brenda from the Horrifying History podcast. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having us.
So for today's episode, we're doing a true crime / paranormal episode, which is something that is kind of like out there. You don't really hear too much of other podcasts, but this one, when I first heard about this, I never knew, because I'm a huge true crime guy, and I never knew about this until I heard it on another podcast where they talk about scary stories, which was the podcast is called Scared to Death, and they brought this story, and I'm like, oh, I have to do an episode on this. So, Brenda, I have a bit of a scenario before we start for you. Okay. Now, you're out shopping, you're alone, you're out shopping, you're in a mall or whatever, and a officer comes up and he says to you, "Hi, my name is Officer Roland, Roseland. Your car was just stolen and we have the person in custody. Can you just come with me and so you can get your vehicle back and fill out some paperwork?" Do you go with him, or do you say, who the heck are you?
Honestly, I wouldn't go. And it's because I have too much of a true crime brain to actually go for that. I would demand to see proof of that my car was even gone to begin with. I would expect to see a badge number, and I would never go with an individual alone, because usually the cops come in pairs. So until it was proven to me, I absolutely wouldn't. I'd get a badge number and call in first to see if he was legit.
Yeah, you know what? You are absolutely correct, because Officer Roseland was one of the many aliases that serial killer Ted Bundy actually used to lure his victim in. And this is what's the topic of today's episode. He used many aliases. This was one of them. That's how he actually lured victims in. This is how he got one of his victims. He said, "Hey, your car's stolen. Can you come with me?" And the girl's like, "Yeah, sure. I'll come with you." And they get into the car. And then all of a sudden they pass the police station and she's like, "Okay, something's wrong here. Like, he's driving a Volkswagen Beetle. There's something wrong." And I think this is the victim that actually escaped and ended up helping the police catch him at one point.
But the thing is, I do have a question for you.
Yep.
Do you think that would work today? Because we are living in 2024. This happened quite a while ago, in times that there wasn't so much press out there, or we didn't even know about Ted Bundy. And I think with Ted Bundy, the good thing about him is we learned a lot from him, and as a public. So I have a hard time to believe that all of that would work 100% today. It would partially, but I think people would be more suspicious. What do you think?
I think you would be right. A lot of people would be like, okay, like you said, hey, what division are you from? What's your badge number? If you're a detective, can I see some, your ID, your badge, your tin? Things don't seem right here. Yeah, I think in today's day and age, there are some people that do try to do this stuff. They pretend to be cops and they actually end up getting caught by other cops. It happens more in the US than here. Actually, I have a funny story about that too. I'll tell later on. But I don't think it would work in today's day and age, because they can easily back then. I think during when Ted Bundy was active, I think it was from 1974 to 1978. People didn't have cell phones on them. Back then, if you wanted to make a call, you would have to either go home or find a payphone.
Exactly.
And in today's day and age, if someone says, "Hey, I'm a cop," blah, 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 they'll be like, "Okay, hold on. If you're refusing to give me a badge number and all this, I'm actually going to call 911 and say, 'Hey, I have an officer in front of me. His name is this and this, this. Does he work at this division? What's going on? Can you please send some help? I'm kind of scared.'" And yeah, even with today, with TikTok and YouTube or whatever, people would be filming this like crazy, going, "Oh, watch out for this man. He is pretending to be a cop," and blah, blah. So I don't think today it would work in today's day and age.
Well, I was under a situation, it was about 2 years ago, and I was actually, a producer was paid for me to go on their show. So they sent me out to Toronto via train. And I was told that their PA was going to come pick me up at Union Station, downtown Toronto. Mm-hmm. So as I'm getting out, the alleged PA sent me a text and said, "Yeah, I'm driving a van," gave me the color and the make. And I decided to park 5 blocks away in, Shady Avenue and possibly Kidnap Street for you to go walk down with your luggage, because it was busy in front of Union Station. And as soon as I got that, I'm like, this is shady as hell. So what I did, because again, true crime brain, I asked her to send her driver's license so I can recognize her. and send me the plates, the picture of her plates and a vehicle picture from the side back. And she did. And then I'm like, okay. Then I promptly, because I have an iPhone, I shared my location with my husband and I sent those pictures for him. Now, the thing is, you would think if you would get these random pictures and instant share location, a partner would probably be like, that's weird. Not my husband. He's like, oh, that's just Brenda. And he didn't even think anything of it. And that's when I got into the vehicle and I said, the only thing in this situation that was not here was candy and a puppy.
Yeah, pretty much.
But again, it's very important for everybody to realize to use these functions that have on cell phones, because in Ted Bundy's days, you didn't have these options.
Oh, no.
It's a lot easier to track people now than it was in the 70s.
Oh, yeah. Like back then, people would just like leave their families saying, hey, I'm going for cigarettes, and just off you go and good luck finding them because they are under a different name or alias or whatnot. So yeah, you're right. In today's day and age, it's a lot more harder to even get away with what Ted Bundy did.
Yes.
So I want to say at the top of the episode, some of the stuff I'll be talking about is maybe not harmful, but we're getting into a bit of true crime. So Ted Bundy was a piece of garbage. He did a lot of horrible things. So I'll be getting into a bit of that. I'm just putting this disclaimer up now. We'll start off with how Ted Bundy became this piece of garbage murderer. So he was born Theodore Robert Bundy. Like I said, he was active from 1974 to 1978. And then when he was caught, he confessed to over 30 murders. Only 20 of them were confirmed, and he's suspected of killing 36 people still. Investigators say it's hard to prove because he never talked about certain crimes. He always said to reporters, oh, I did certain things, but it was too close to home, too close to family. And he never would talk about any of these crimes. I'll actually get into one crime he was suspected of when he was a kid. So his mother was named Eleanor Lois. She had him at the home of unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont. Now, his father's ID was never really confirmed. His mother said, oh, it was a salesman named Lloyd Marshall, but on the actual birth certificate, it was a guy named Jack Worthington, and she said, oh, yeah, he was a U.S. Army vet, and then he left me when he found out I was pregnant. It was the mother always said a lot of different things to Ted when he was growing up. Now, as Ted grew up, he thought his grandparents were his mom and dad, and his mother was his sister. But eventually, later on in life, Ted Bundy found out the truth that his sister was actually his mom. Now, he kept telling different stories about this because that's who Ted Bundy was. I don't know if you found anything in your research on your end, but he always said, oh, this happened, that happened.
Well, the one thing that I thought was very unusual is, so her parents, Louise's parents, sent her away to a home of unwed mothers in Vermont to give birth in secret, because back then being pregnant out of wedlock is an embarrassment, right?
Oh, yeah.
So then when she returned to her family, it was actually her father, Samuel, that traveled back to the home of unwed mothers to get baby Ted. So Lois left him there. And that's how it all started with a lie. They pretended to adopt him from an orphanage. And then that was the basic story. Then it turned into Louise as his sister, adopted scissor. But nobody came out for sure how old he was, or when he found out, or how he found out this truth. But you can't tell me it wouldn't affect a person.
No, it would really mess up somebody to find out that, your sister's actually your mom and your parents are actually your grandparents. That wouldn't be okay,
that's a little messed up.
Yeah, what the heck's going on?
But the other thing was the fact that how Bundy's mother claimed that she was seduced by a sailor named Jack Worthington. Many people have researched that. There's no record of anyone in the Navy or Marine archives by that name.
Oh, yeah.
So that brings up another question. Who was his father? And as we were talking before the show about, there's been rumors for years that Ted may have been fathered by Samuel himself, and this was a cover-up. But that also is not necessarily the main train of thought.
No, I think that, like you said, I think that was disproven, I think in 2012 or something, when they did a DNA test.
Yep.
And like you said, it would mess up anybody to find that out. And it's kind of interesting. I never knew that person never existed. It's kind of funny when someone says, oh yeah, this person was in the military, but when you try to go back and try to find their actual any records, you can't find anything. But that person, I think his mother still remained truthful, saying, "Oh no, this is your father. This is who the person is," and so on. But Ted probably said, "Well, I can't find this guy," and she's like, "Oh no, he probably exists." But
yeah, somewhere they just lost the records. It's fine.
Yeah. Oh, they got burnt in a fire. Blah blah blah.
See, that worked back then.
Oh yeah.
Today, not so much.
There's an actual guy, I have to cover him, but he started a UFO cult.
Mhm.
And he claimed that he claimed all this bunch of things. He claimed he was in the French Foreign Legion. He claimed he was in jail in Turkey. But anytime like someone said, "Hey, okay, we tried finding any records, we went to Turkey, tried to find some stuff. We went to the Foreign Legion, we tried to find some things. We can't find anything." His excuse is, "Oh, it all got burnt in a fire." That was like the go-to thing.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah. But as actually Ted Bundy was growing up, there were some signs that he was showing some weird behavior. I think it was Lois's younger sister got up from a nap and she saw a whole bunch of knives like in a circle around her, and she looked over and she saw young Ted like looking at her, smiling. Even a neighbor that lived next door to Ted Bundy said that he was very mean to the neighborhood kids. He would bring them into the woods and like not torture them, like hurt them, but he would do very like, I guess being that pretty much a bully in a sense. And some people said that he actually engaged in animal cruelty, which way back then that was part of the McDonald's triad for a serial killer, which was animal cruelty, bedwetting, and I think fire starter, I think it was for the triad, and that was disproven. But a lot of people said he did that stuff. And he, even when he was interviewed by some journalists, he always told them, "Oh, well, I don't know why people want to be friends, and it's just a weird thought to me, and I just decided to be alone." But when they interviewed his former classmates, they said, "Well, he was really well liked. He had girlfriends. He was a popular guy. Like, I don't know, like, what are you talking about? Like, he was very well liked." And this is just like, this is the thing about Ted Bundy, is he is, from my research of crimes, was a psychologist said that he was a chameleon. He knew how to turn it on and off again. He knew how to like navigate certain situations. And you see it in the movie with Zac Efron, Bundy. I think it was Bundy, that movie that Zac Efron did, where you see some of that in Ted Bundy, where when he was, there's a part where he gets pulled over by a cop, and the cop's like, "Okay, where are you going?" He's like, "Oh, no, I'm just going, going back home to the wife. You know how it is, officer, bagging me and blah, blah, blah." And, and I think that was one case where Ted Bundy was just let go with a warning, I think. But
well, Ted Bundy himself, even at this point of his life, and he's still in his childhood, or like late teens, he already was a chameleon, because what research has shown is that Samuel had an explosive temper. He was a church deacon who was accused of being obsessed with pornography. And it is believed that Ted was exposed to that collection and obviously that temper, which some believe it sparked what he did later. But if you turn the page on that, he was an honor student, and he took courses in university, like in psychology, law, Asian studies. Like, he was very, very intelligent.
Yeah, like I think at one point he was like on a board for I forgot, I think a certain law firm. Now, this is actually, it's funny you mentioned that he went to university, because he went to the University of Puget Sound first. Then he transferred to the University of Washington to study Chinese. And that's actually where he met Diana Edwards, or she's known as Stephanie Brooks. She's known as by a whole bunch of aliases. And at this point, Ted Bundy actually fell in love with her. Like, this was his dream girl. He was going to have the whole white picket fence life with her. But I believe she came from a family that had a lot of people that were very successful, and she was like a bit of upper class. And then she looked at Ted Bundy and said, "Okay, well, you're going nowhere in life. Yeah, you're studying Chinese, but I don't see a future with us." And Ted Bundy always, from the research I've done, he always prided himself on his class and his looks because where his family came from. So they broke up. Then he decided, you know what, I'm going to reinvent myself. So, like you said, he started studying law. I think he was going for his bar license to practice, to become a lawyer. He actually ended up becoming like a member of a political party. I forget which one it was in the U.S., but he started helping doing campaigns for them.
Oh, that was for Nelson Rockefeller. He was the Republican. Bundy was a Republican delegate from Washington State for the 1968 convention for Nelson Rockefeller.
Yeah, that's the guy actually. Yeah. And he started doing all this stuff, and then later on when he bumped into Diana again, she's like, "Oh wow, you're becoming a lawyer. You're involved with what's the Republican Party?"
Mm-hmm.
Yep, the Republican Party and all this. Okay, like, like you've changed. Like, okay, let's like maybe give this a go again. So they actually started dating. And then Ted Bundy asked her, "Hey, will you marry me?" She's like, "Oh my God, yes. This is so, I'm gonna have like a bright future with this man. He's good, whatever." And then he just ghosted her. And then
Now, the one thing that I thought was ironic in this whole thing is the fact that he received a bachelor's degree in psychology. And like, so he tries to paint himself as a completely different person to get her back. He gets his degree, and on paper that looks awesome, but then he ghosts her.
Yeah, that's kind of like, it is like, it's funny you mentioned like he got his bachelor's in psychology, because that is like, I forgot the name of the book I was reading. It was about like all about narcissists and their behavior and what they do. And this is like one behavior that they do is they, build you up, they make you feel good, and then all of a sudden when they do something wrong towards you, like what Ted Bundy did, he just ghosted her. And then when she called him saying, "Hey, like we're engaged, like we have to plan a wedding. How come you're not like calling me? You're not hanging out with me. We're not spending any time together as a couple." He just said, "I don't know what you're talking about," and just hung up the phone. And he did not feel bad about it at all. He didn't feel horrible. He even told a journalist when he told this story, he just said, "I just wanted to prove to myself that I could marry her, and I did it, and I just got bored, and that was it."
And that's just a clear sign of his sociopathic nature.
Yeah.
Like zero remorse.
Yeah, like I think the best example is like when you blow your nose and you blow it and then you throw it in the garbage. You're not thinking about that tissue like all day, a month, going, "Oh, that poor tissue, it's in the garbage now, it's in a landfill. Oh, what did I do?" No, it's just like, okay, I blew my nose, I threw it in the garbage, I'm not thinking about it. This is what he kind of did to her. He's like, "Yep, I just did this. I don't care. Like, meh. I got my revenge. It's fine." But guaranteed, like, thank God. But she was probably heartbroken over this, and I couldn't really find her because I think she said that they said that she did a whole bunch of different aliases, but I guaranteed like she was scarred from this. And maybe when the news came out, like who Ted Bundy actually was, she probably said, "Okay, shoot, I dodged a big bullet there."
But ironically, when he became involved with Stephanie and then they broke up due to his immaturity, his lack of ambition, one thing that was noticed after the fact when he was arrested, that all of Bundy's victims look very similar to Stephanie. They were all white females between the ages of 15 and 25, all college students, mostly from middle-class backgrounds, and they all had long, straight, dark brown hair with the part in the middle, just like Stephanie. So as much as he said, using the Kleenex analogy, he was done with her, doesn't sound like he actually was.
It's funny you mentioned that because when I was in college, I was taking a criminology course, part of my degree I was doing. And my prof, he was a former Toronto cop. He worked in homicide and all that. And we were talking about serial killers, and we came across Ted Bundy. And he said the exact point you said, like, oh, he went after girls that had like a certain part in the middle of their hair. They looked a certain type. But he said, if you look at most of Ted Bundy's victims, like there was one where he lured people where he pretended to have a cast on and a crutch, and he'd be like, he had his books on top of his Volkswagen Beetle, and he would tell girls, "Hey, do you mind, like I'm off to like my class, can you just like put my books in my car for me, please? Like give me a hand." And they would say, "Oh, sure, no problem. I'll like, do a good deed for the day." He said his theory was he would go after people that were helpful, that they wanted to say, "Okay, let me help this poor person out because look, he's a good looking guy. Like, okay, like I have nothing. He doesn't give me the creepy factor like this stereotypical serial killer you're thinking in your head, the creepy guy that looks ugly, that is a loner, that lives in his basement." But you look at Ted Bundy, he's a good looking guy. Heck, like when he was in trial, which we'll get to soon, he had a fan club of girls that would attend his trial. And I think they wrote love notes to him. Anytime like he would be sitting and a witness would be talking or whatever, he would look back at them and smile, and they would all giggle. And a reporter actually asked some of them, like, "Why are you here? Like, why are you like supporting him?" They're like, "Oh, well, he's such a good looking guy, and he seems like a very sensible person and blah, blah, blah. And it's those looks that he kind of like played off, and people were like, okay, let me help this person. So my prof said he went after people that were helpful, even though all the girls looked a certain way and a certain type, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
It was very interesting he brought that up because, I think there was like one point where he tried and girls were like saying, like going to police saying, hey, there's this creepy guy that's trying to like lure me into his like Volkswagen Bug. Can you look into that? And I think that's kind of like what brought him to the police radar. But I found that interesting.
The one thing that I found is very interesting in with what you're saying is in the early 1970s, Bundy worked for a suicide hotline in Seattle. Yep. And he was remembered by his coworkers as a skilled volunteer who helped ease troubled callers, and he saved lives. So again, going back to the oxymoron that he is, here he is killing girls. In the same breath, he's helping ease troubled callers and saving lives on a suicide hotline.
Yeah, like the person he worked with, Anne Rule, she worked side by side with him, and she said at one point, I was actually going to do my unusual fact of the day on this, but she said that anytime they would finish work at night, if it was late at night, he would walk her to the car. And he told her once, Anne, if anything bad ever happened to you, I would not forgive myself. And he just walked away. And it's just like, okay, you worked at a suicide hotline and yet you're a serial killer. That's like a bit of an oxymoron.
But it also shows how good he was at disguising who he really was.
Oh, yeah. Like if you look at any serial killer, they are very, very good at, I don't want to make them sound like they're geniuses or anything. They're pieces of garbage. But in Ted Bundy's case, like I said at the top of the show, he was a bit of a chameleon. He knew how to turn it on and off again. He knew how to turn on the charm. Like even if you look at, I think it was John Wayne Gacy, when he lured his victims into his little rumpus room that he had, as soon as the door locked, he turned into a completely different person. And that's what Ted Bundy would do. There's actually, speaking when he was a kid, when Ted Bundy was asked, like, when you started killing, he always would tell different stories. But there's one case of Anne Marie Burr. I hope I'm pronouncing the last name. She was an 8-year-old girl that vanished from her home in Tacoma on August 31st, 1961. Ted Bundy was 14 at the time. Now, police did find a small set of footprints around the property, and they just thought, okay, this is a teenager that kidnapped this little girl. And the father said, I saw Ted Bundy in a ditch hiding near my daughter's school. His newspaper route that he did when he was a kid was one of the stops he did was at the Burr's home. And when she went missing, he was suspected of the crime, but they could not prove that it was him. And he actually ended up writing a letter to the Burr family saying, I had no involvement with your daughter's disappearance. It wasn't me. I'm innocent, blah, blah, blah. And even when journalists would ask him about it, he wouldn't talk about it. He just said it wasn't me, and he would just move on to...
Now, experts have, they do believe that this is his first abduction, like you said, and murder. Mm-hmm. But one thing I found was interesting that they tried really to pin him to this. Recently, DNA analysis was done, and they were unable to link him to the girl's disappearance. So as much as people say that it was him, I do have some doubt it was, because this guy was all about the bragging when it came to the end.
Oh, yeah, he would never shut up. Like, when reporters actually interviewed him, I forgot the name of the two reporters that actually first went to see him in jail when he was actually captured. They asked him, okay, why you're doing this and blah, blah, blah. And he wouldn't talk about it. He's like, oh, I'm not talking about any killings or whatever. But then if you actually watch the Ted Bundy tapes, they said to him, okay, Ted, we want you to be an expert witness on this person. Like, how would you do this? And the own reporter said that he just picked up the recorder that they had on the table. He cradled it like it was a child, and he just started speaking to it, going, yes, this person's very troubled. He is this and that, like kind of like the whole, if you watch Criminal Minds, like how the profilers would profile a serial killer. He was pretty much doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he was the killer. And like even when he was caught, he was in court on trial. He represented himself because he was at the end of the day, he was a lawyer. Like, you can do that. You can represent yourself here in Canada and US. And he made a whole show of his trial. Like there's a part I was watching Ted Bundy tapes where one of his defense lawyers, cross-examined the investigator that ended up like working the crime scene at the Chi Omega house, the sorority that he attacked. He went berserker. And after cross-examination was done by the defense attorney, all this guy's colleagues said, okay, he did a very good cross-examination. He was well done. And then Ted Bundy just stood up, was like standing behind him the whole time, then went up to the podium again. And he's like, okay, officer, blah, blah, blah. Can you tell me what you saw on the crime scene and describe it? And, oh, excuse me. And the officer would say, yes, I walked into the home. This is this. And the lawyer got so fed up with Ted Bundy because he was being a real nuisance to his like defense team. He just packed his stuff up, got up and just left the courtroom and he said, I quit because Ted Bundy was such a pain in the ass. And there was at one point where he was supposed to show up for a trial for, I think, part of his sentencing or something. And he didn't show up. And then when the judge asked him, well, how come you did not show up? You're late to my courtroom, blah, blah, blah. Ted Bundy like threw a folder on the ground, started pointing at the judge, saying, like my jail cell is so bad, I can hardly read in there. It's so dark and blah, blah, blah. And the judge was like, okay, let me see your cell. And then he allowed him to go into the law library. And that's when he actually escaped. And then I think he got caught again, where he had no ID. Cops had no idea who the heck this guy was. And they figured out, oh, this is the escaped killer, Ted Bundy. Brought him back.
Yeah, he escaped twice, which I thought, after the first time, you really should consider watching him a bit better.
Yeah.
But he got out twice.
Yeah, like, he was like, I don't know, like, I think at one point, one guard did an inspection of his cell and he found like a saw blade in his cell. He was trying to hack off the bars to get away. So they caught him then. And he made a whole mockery, like even when he was being formally charged, the prosecution wanted to have him formally charged in front of reporters. So Ted Bundy came down the elevator and he said to Ted Bundy, you're being charged with, and he started reading off the charges. And Ted Bundy was just walking around, smiling at the reporters. He put his hand up in the air. He's like, oh, can I plead not guilty now? And he started laughing. And then after the prosecutor was done charging him, Ted Bundy's like, oh, well, I want to speak to the reporters now. And they're like, no, we have a subpoena saying you can't speak to the reporters. And he starts yelling at the prosecution saying, oh, well, the truth will come out. You're trying to silence me. How dare you? And that's when like the cops like ushered him into the elevator and brought him back to his cell. And like I said, he made a huge spectacle of his trial. Like he thought it was a joke. Like I think at one point Ted thought, okay, I'm going to be let go of this. I'm going to be smart. I'm going to show the world how smart and clever I am. And when he had kidnapped, I think it was this, when he escaped the second time, he abducted an 8-year-old girl and ended up murdering her. And he was charged a second time for the death penalty. And in the court, for that trial, again, he made a spectacle of it. He was involved with this girl, and she sat in the court. She was always in the courtroom, and I guess supporting him or whatever. And one day he called her up to the witness stand. They had a person in the audience I forgot what you call them. You go to them like to finalize like contracts, or I forgot what they're called. But
like a notary republic.
Yeah, notary republic. And he found this loophole that if you're on the stand and someone asks you to marry them and you say yes, you're married. So he brought her up to the stand. He questioned her about all these random things, and then he said, "Oh, I have one last question. Will you marry me?" And the girl's like, "Yes." And he's like, "Okay, well, I, Ted Bundy, marry us." And then they were married, and apparently they had a kid. And people always ask, like, okay, how did you have a kid if he was on death row and he wasn't allowed any conjugal visits? And,
exactly.
She said, oh, that's between me and my husband's business on how we conceived our daughter. And he has a kid somewhere out there now. I think the wife changed her name and all that, like most people do. Oh yeah, the girl's name, I was reading my notes here, was the murder of Kimberly Leach. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And then he was sentenced to death on February 10th, 1980. This was for the third time for that murder. And then when the judge passed sentencing, it's that famous photo, if you look him up, him yelling at the judge, and he's like, tell the jury that they're wrong. And the cops like dragged him out of the courtroom because he was just being an idiot. And the judge is like, okay, whatever, like you're done for.
Wasn't he sentenced to death 3 times in 2 trials?
Yep.
Like that itself is weird, don't you find? That's not a norm.
From the interview that they did in the Ted Bundy tapes, the investigator said, like, people asked them, okay, well, if he's being sentenced to death twice, why do you want to sentence him again? And they just wanted to make sure that the death penalty would stick, because throughout this time, his lawyers were trying to overthrow the death penalty. They were trying to fight it. They were filing injunction. I'm trying to use legal terms. I have no idea. They were trying to get him off the death penalty. And at one point, Ted actually, during when the Green River Killer was active, he actually went to police when he heard about the case, and he said, hey, I can help you catch this guy. And the FBI went to him, interviewed him. He would give him a whole bunch of reports. Like he said, oh, watch the dumping ground because he'll come back. But the Green River Killer never did that. He just had a dumping ground and he just left it afterwards and found a new dumping ground. And then the cops were like, okay, like this, he's just trying to prolong his trial. He's trying to get out of this. All these reports are BS. Like, we're just going to humor him. Even like the judge was so stupid that when the judge sentenced him for the first time to death, he said, oh, if we met under better circumstances, I would have loved to have you practice in my courtroom because you're a good lawyer or something. And it's like, you're being nice to a killer. He he confessed to like, what did I say, like 30 murders, and he's suspected of 20, but people think he did 100. Like, you're being nice to a piece of garbage. Like, it should be, I'm glad you're being sentenced to death and you're not going to be around anymore. Like, screw you. Like, it should have been that, But
I found it interesting. I don't know if you came up with it in your research. According to Officer Bob Hayward, he was the police officer who approached Bundy when he got arrested originally. He had his gun pulled on Bundy. And years later, when he was in the courtroom, he actually stated to the press he had expressed guilt and remorse for not killing him. He said, I didn't want to shoot the guy, but I wish I did. And that shows such a difference between how he's treated by the judge and how he was treated by the police.
Oh, yeah.
It was a huge difference. It almost sounded like the judge respected him a bit.
Yeah, which is kind of like a weird thing. Like, yeah, he's representing himself. He's doing a good job. But again, at the end of the day, he is a piece of garbage.
He killed people.
Yeah. Like,
not just a little bit. He killed people, but he's respectful to him? I don't know if I could be.
But so at the night of his execution, because he was given the electric chair on the 7:16 a.m. on Tuesday, January 24th in 1986, people were outside the Florida State Prison and he was being held and he was going to be executed. They were having like a party. They had like fireworks ready to go. They were selling t-shirts. Some people were like, yes, this horrible man's going to be put to death. Other people were there saying, oh, the death penalty is horrible. Blah, blah, blah. I think near the end of his time at the Florida State Prison, he ended up speaking to some guy. He was like a religious nut or something. And he blamed pornography on why he was killing. Because from my research, Ted was obsessed with pornography and watching all these films and all that. Which
allegedly came from his grandfather's collection originally.
Oh, I never knew that. Oh, that's interesting.
He in his final day, he did claim that porn was to blame for his desire of women. And that's why they think that Samuel had a big porn collection and Ted kind of dipped his toes into it. And that's where he started having his obsession with porn.
No, I did not know that. Like, I thought it was just like, oh, I never knew that his grandfather allegedly had a huge porn collection. Oh, yeah.
Remember, he was a deacon.
Yeah. Wow. So like people were so excited and all that. And again, like he was accused of porn. Like he was doing all these interviews near the end of his life. And then when he was strapped down to old Sparky, he looked at his lawyer and he said, Jim, Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my friends and family. Then when the old switch was pulled, old Sparky took him to hell where he belongs. And he was pronounced dead, and people shot off fireworks at the outside the prison. They were singing, they were dancing. It was like a huge thing. Like if you look up footage of this, it was like you think it's like a carnival or concert. People were singing like they were singing a certain song someone made up about Ted Bundy being put to death and all that, and it was like a huge thing. And people were like, "Yes, he's finally being killed and murdered because this guy was a piece of garbage." And
now, one thing about his final words that I found very ironic was the fact that he's like, "Give my love to my family and friends." The guy was a clear sociopath.
Yeah,
he couldn't feel love.
No, he could not.
So why would you put that out there? Well, it's because all he cared about was his image.
Yeah.
And that was just a comment on image. And I think it's very telling of his own psychology.
Yeah, like I guess he was someone that, again, was probably, I'm not a psychologist, but he was probably a narcissist. He probably thought, okay, I'm smarter than everybody. I'm more clever than everybody. And I'm going to get off this. Okay, no, I'm not going to die. Okay, well, I'm going to try to make it sound like I'm a loving husband and son and
good person. And
yeah. And it was just
too late.
Circumstances that, got me out of this. So now this is the part of the episode where we're going to get into the paranormal side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 2001, a guard at the Florida State Prison where Bundy spent his final days actually was a prison guard. He told a reporter anonymously that guards saw Ted Bundy sit in the electric chair. And when the guards would go up and saying, okay, what the heck's going on? They said that he would smile and say, I fooled you all, didn't I? And every time like they would try to approach him, he would just disappear. Some convicts that are in death row say that they see Ted Bundy walking around the cells. They see that they feel his presence. Correctional officers were actually ordered by their supervisor, if you ever have a sighting or a run-in with him in this prison, you are not allowed to tell anybody. You are not allowed to talk to the press about it. You're not even allowed to like write a letter about it or journal about it, because you will be fired from your job. And this guard went on the record anonymously to this newspaper article saying that, we see him all the time in the prison, and it's kind of weird. Like even the Volkswagen Bug that he drove around, I think it was owned by a musician from some metal band or something at one point, and he bought the car just to have as like a true crime artifact. And I think he didn't pay for it fully, or he missed payments on it or something. And the repo man that came to repossess the car said that I felt funny things in that car. Like the hairs in the back of my neck were standing up. Like he's like, that car felt off. And I think it's in a museum now. And I think people say that the car lights come on even though there's no battery in it. They see a whole bunch of weird things happen around that car. So yeah, like that's a bit weird and ooky spooky.
Well, if you were to break it down, if the ghost of Ted Bundy is haunting these places, he's actually in a better place than he should be. If he's sitting in a purgatory, he's kind of in a good place comparative to what could happen in theory. So, but it makes sense to me that he would have essence still left in that car or in the chair, because honestly, him going to the chair, when you look at any of the interviews he did, it didn't look at all like he was scared about it. It was like he was, for lack of better terms, getting off on that press. And how much more press would he get by getting into the electric chair and smiling? Right?
Yeah.
So you were just feeding into it. So those two places make a lot of sense, or in prison where he spent his last days makes logical sense. But if I were working in that prison, I wouldn't want to deal with a serial killer's ghost. I would just go somewhere else. Maybe go into the police force and deal with the living.
You know what? Like, I'm a bit opposite because I did security for the longest time, and I always wanted to have that where, like, I had to do security for like a graveyard, or I had to do security for some like some haunted building or something. And I wanted to have like a spooky run-in to be like, yeah, I'm a security guard. I deal with this stuff all the time. Like, that's just me.
Mhm.
Like, but I never, like, there was actually a guy, he did a lot of TikToks where he was a security guard for a graveyard in the US, and he did these videos where he's working the graveyard shift at night, driving around, and all of a sudden, because there is some graveyard cemeteries have a church on the grounds where you can have the service and go right to the burial,
Mhm.
and lights would be on inside the chapel, and he knew that they were off for the night, so he would go in and he's like, okay, is anybody in here? And he would hear a voice taunting him, and he's like, listen, if you do not come out, your ass is going to jail. Come out now. And then he heard a voice saying, well, I'm right in front of you. And he's like, nope, I'm out of here. And he would just bolt it out of there.
Hmm.
He would get mad all the time, saying I have guards quit on me all the time. And it's funny where I can't really say, but where my wife works, she works in a haunted building that has security.
Mhm.
And she told me of a story that a security guard had a run-in. I know this is a bit off topic, but he had a run-in with a spirit that's in the building. He got so freaked out, he went up to his supervisor after his shift. He gave him his stuff, and he said, I'm done. I quit. I can't handle this building anymore. And he just left.
When I was working in a hospital in Ontario, in Canada, and it was the first day of this lady who was working in environmental services. And let's just say, in front of me, she had an experience. She freaked out so bad. She goes, this stuff happened all the time. And I said, here? Yeah. And then she's like, I quit. She literally left her buggy with all her supplies. She took off her name tag, threw it on there, and she walked out. That was it. It was her first day. And honestly, this sounds bad, but maybe that was for the best because we had a very active hospital. But I do have a working theory here. If you're looking at the spiritual side of this, it would make sense that Ted Bundy would stay because, well, if you look at how he was raised, his dad was, or his grandfather was a deacon, so he was around religion. If his thought process would be, well, I'm not good enough to go to heaven, I might be going to the other place. Therefore, it makes sense logically that he would stay as an earthbound spirit. But the other thing is, after his execution, his remains were cremated at the request of his family and spread over mountains in Washington where the bodies of some of his victims were discovered. That might not have been what he wanted. So it could be that too. Who knows?
And maybe some, unfinished business.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's time to bring in my favorite ghost hunter of them all, Zach Bagans. Now, he did I have to see if I can find this, but he did a 4-part miniseries that aired in October called Ghost Adventures Serial Killer Spirits, where they went to different places. One of them was actually interesting. They went to like the location of H.H. Holmes's former murder hotel, which is a post office now. I think they did covered like John Wayne Gacy, Jake Bird, and then all of a sudden the last one I think they did was Ted Bundy, and they went to one of the homes that Ted Bundy held a girl named Deborah Kent. He abducted her from a parking lot. She was attending a hockey game of her brother, and she said, okay, I'm just going to go and go get something, or I forgot what the circumstances were. And Bundy abducted her from that parking lot. And people say that they actually see a man grabbing a girl and putting her in a Volkswagen Bug and just taking off, and just the car disappears. So he held her at this house called the Hell House for 24 hours, but no one knows where he actually committed the murder of Kent. And Zach Bagans ended up doing an investigation in this home, and he actually caught some EVPs. I believe I read some stories where people are actually contractors were renovating a home, and they heard knocks and things would be moved around, even though like they made sure everything was locked up for the night. Mm-hmm. And they even found notes scattered around the home saying, help me or leave here. And when Zach Bagans did that, he caught an EVP of someone talking or whatever. And if you actually look up the article, you actually see Zach Bagans let's see if I can pull up the website here. Zach Bagans standing like in the house, and he said like, oh no, I don't know if I actually talked to Ted Bundy, but it might have been him that I got the EVP from. I'm trying to find a quote that he said here about the home, because he said that the home just felt off to him, and he felt very weird when he went into the home. And one of the things that actually Ted Bundy said was when he'd be driving, he would look in the mirror and all of a sudden black out and then wake up. And he said he had no idea what happened. And a lot of people say that he was under, some people, not a lot of people, some people theorize that he was under demonic possession. So he was possessed when he did all these killings, which is, I think, just BS that, you know, you put that forth, saying, oh yeah, he was possessed by a demon and all that.
But or what would be more likely is he's trying to pretend he's in a fugue state, and that way he could maybe use the mental health way in court to not have the death penalty.
Oh yeah, the whole kind of like what Ed Gein did, where he was like, even with Ed Gein, or they tried that with Dahmer, tried to plead insanity.
Yeah.
And maybe you're right. Maybe he tried to do that whole route. I don't know if his lawyers tried to put that forth, saying, oh hey, like, oh yeah, he believes he's possessed by a demon. He can't stand trial. So I think he should go into a mental institution for the rest of his life. But
let's be honest, though. Ted Bundy, he wasn't insane. Ed Gein, yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's pretty obvious how Ted Bundy, everything is plotted and planned very meticulously. Whereas Ed Gein, it was more opportunity and creepiness that ruled his thoughts.
Yeah, like I have to do, I'm definitely going to do an episode on Gein, but yeah, he was actually I was watching that Jeffrey Dahmer TV show, and there was a part where the father and the lawyer were talking to him, and they said, oh, well, there's this man was it Milwaukee he lived? I forgot where he lived, where he did all these horrible things and this and that. So we're going to try to use that. Like, did you ever hear about him? And Jeffrey Dahmer said, yeah, I heard about him. And so like they try to use that excuse for him, but obviously it didn't work. Mm-hmm. But again, like you said, like Ted Bundy probably tried to use that, but I guess his lawyer said, yeah, we're not going to do that because it's not going to work if you're probably representing yourself and you have been found mentally fit to stand trial, because you have, in the Canadian sense, from what I remember, you have to understand what's going on. You have to understand why you're there, and you have to understand the legal proceedings of the legal system. So I don't know if it's the same in the US, but if Ted Bundy understood what was going on, he was able to represent himself, he was able to go to the law library and prep for his case, his lawyer probably said, yeah, let's just not go there. Yeah, Ted, shut up. All right, just be quiet. But
what I found was interesting is, do you know that the term serial killer was invented and first used for Ted Bundy as a description of his character? Well,
really?
That tends to pull away from the fact that he was insane. It shows that he planned, he plotted. And as you were saying about what you need to have the classic insanity defense, he didn't put those check marks in the right boxes at all.
No, that's actually very interesting. I never heard about that, because I know I think it was Robert Ressler, the guy that invented and perfected profiling. I think he coined the term serial killer, because back then that wasn't even a term.
Right. But when it was first used, it was against Ted Bundy. And it is a good descriptor of him. It describes his personality. Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Like
he's definitely wasn't any sort of binge or mass killer at all.
No, like there's a famous quote from him saying, when you first murder, everything's planned down to a T. The 100th time you do a killing, you forget where the crowbar is. That just shows
his mental state.
Yeah, like he was an organized killer. He was planned. He did have that berserker mode where he just went into that sorority and ended up doing that brutal murder of all those poor girls that were in that home. And but again, like at the end of the day, he was a piece of garbage. He deserved the death penalty, and to me, the world is a better place without him. But anyway,
I'm with you.
Yeah, that goes with any serial killer or whatever, because like even my prof said when we were doing criminology, a lot of serial killers, psychopaths would, when they get caught, they would tell officers, "Oh man, thank God you caught me, officer, because I was gonna kill again, and I know what I did was wrong, and I'm sick, I need help, and I want to do what's right, and I want to get better, and all this." And my prof says in their head, they're looking at the officer saying in their head, "Wait till you see what I do when I get out." And that's what Ted Bundy did when he escaped the second time, and he abducted that poor little girl and killed her. And that was actually one killing he refused to talk about with the journalists. He would not talk about it because it was quote unquote too close to home or involved family. Even his mother, when the journalists interviewed his mom and said, "Your son is being sentenced to murder," she just looked at them, according to them in the Ted Bundy tapes that I watched, which is an excellent documentary. You have to watch it. Mm-hmm. She looked at them, stood up, said, "Okay, who wants coffee and pie?" and just left the room. And it's just like no emotion was felt, no nothing. Like it was just like, all right, my son's being sentenced to death, whatever.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Again,
oh well, do you want some tea and crumpets?
Yeah, you could argue maybe that was her way of like maybe not showing emotion or whatever.
Compartmentalizing.
That's another part. But again,
still pretty darn cold.
Yeah.
And the thing is, of what you're saying about would he have continued? He absolutely wouldn't have stopped. There's no way. Because if you look at his back history, he said he believed to have killed 36 in 6 different states. But then he also did things to make himself look even more notorious and saying, well, if you add a digit, then you'll have my number. But the other thing, too, is if you look back, there was only one survivor who he attacked that was fortunate enough to escape physically unharmed. There was about 5 or 6 victims that were fortunate to survive his attacks, but these were all bludgeoned or strangled and barely survived. Like, this guy wasn't playing around. So if he wasn't caught, I guarantee you his numbers would be a lot higher.
Oh, yeah. Like it was kind of like if you look at the... was it the Golden State Killer, where he did all these killings and all of a sudden he had this massive cooling off period, and I think he was active again. And then when they eventually caught him, he didn't care. Like, he's like, "Oh, I have a roast in the oven." Like, again, like Ted Bundy would have probably been the same thing. Like, cops would have probably eventually caught him and he would have not showed any remorse. He would have been some old grandpa or something. But, yeah, that is the whole Ted Bundy episode. He, again, was like one of, I think, America's most prolific serial killers. That's something you think of is Ted Bundy. Like, again, he had like I said before, he had a fan club in court of women that wanted to like date him, and they wrote love letters to him. And they, it was the whole, there's a book I have to read. It's called Women Who Love Serial Killers or something, where it's the whole, "Oh, well, I can fix him. He's damaged. I can fix him." Like, even when Charles Manson was on trial, he had a fan club.
Absolutely. His followers outside his trial actually started to threaten to set themselves on fire as martyrs for him.
Oh, yeah. Like,
that's insane.
Yeah. Like, he was like, yeah, like anytime like I hear this where it's like, girls are like wanting to date serial killers and write love letters to them. And like, even if you see that in the whole Jeffrey Dahmer series where people were writing Dahmer fan mail pretty much, saying, "Oh yeah, I dressed up with you as you as Halloween. This is awesome, blah, blah, blah." It's just like, I know I cover true crime, but I know like these killers are messed up individuals that are pieces of shit. Like, they are individuals that they give the excuse of, "Oh, well, my mother was a bad person and I didn't get hugged enough as a kid." Like, Ted Bundy, yes, his whole situation was messed up with, and you found out his parents were his grandparents, and his sister was his mom, actually. And yes, he did grow up, like, apparently his grandfather was a very abusive individual. He would beat the family dog.
But how many people, though, grow up in an abusive household worse than Ted Bundy and grow up to be great individuals?
Yeah, they grow up to be absolutely fine. They get out of that situation. They go above and beyond, and they become, like you said, normal individuals of society. So
I think, honestly, Ted Bundy, he's like a Jekyll and Hyde in my brain. This is the best way I can describe him, is a true Jekyll and Hyde. But the thing is, he got off on being both Jekyll and Hyde. Yeah. And it was that great secret that he hid from everybody, that what he actually was as a person. And I think that he really enjoyed presenting himself as Mr. Perfection, Mr. GQ, but nobody knows my dark secret, that I'm a killer. Yeah, and I think that's what fed him.
Yeah, it's that thing of always like being like an upstanding individual of society. Like, he was a lawyer. He was like a volunteer for the Republican Party, and people look at that saying, "Oh, he's a very successful individual." But then when they found out, oh yeah, like he was a serial killer, like, oh, well, we did not see that coming.
Yeah, and that's why he was so good at what he did.
Yeah,
he was very much a chameleon, like you said.
Yeah. I think there was a story I remember hearing where this girl ended up going on a date with some guy, and then all of a sudden she's like, you know what? I feel off. Like, he seems like I have like a women's intuition. Like, okay, like I have to get away from this person. So she excused herself, went to the washroom, ended up like getting a payphone or phone from the restaurant, calling her big brother saying, listen, I'm on a date with this guy. Can you just come pick me up? I feel that there's something wrong with him. So the brother ended up picking her up. And all of a sudden one night, the father heard like some rustling on the side of his house. He goes out and some guy just jumps out of the bushes and runs away. And they're like, oh, someone tried to break into our home. Like, maybe it was this creepy guy, because apparently he picked her up from her house for their date. Mm-hmm. And then years later, they're watching the news. All of a sudden, the girl sees this guy's face on the news, and that was Ted Bundy. She was on a date with Ted Bundy, and she's like, holy shit, like, mm-hmm. What? Like, it was that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, again, your radar was a little off.
Yeah, but that's the Ted Bundy episode. Someone that was not an interesting individual, but a very well-known individual in true crime. And like you said, like we covered the whole episode, he was a very messed up individual, and I guaranteed, like, he tried to do everything to avoid the death penalty, but unfortunately, nothing worked. Mm-hmm. So, not unfortunately, but good, he got the electric chair. So now it's time for my unusual fact of the day. This is something I'm starting to do at the end of every episode. Now, this one is something, again, these are like facts I have floating around my head. Like, sometimes, like, I'll tell people in conversation. Mm-hmm. And once my wife looked at me because she was watching The Greatest Showman, and I'm like, and I didn't know what that movie was about. Then the name P.T. Barnum showed up. I'm like, oh, it's P.T. Barnum. He started like, he was a great flim-flam man. Like, he started like a museum of people. Like, he did all these like weird things, and he said it was up to the audience to decide if it was real or not. Mm-hmm. And she looked at me and said, how do you know all these things? So I decided to put this at the end of every show. This one is, so do you know why whenever, like, if you go to Swiss Chalet or if you're like, someone's carving up a turkey, they ask you, okay, do you want white meat or dark meat? You know where that term came from?
No.
So back in the Victorian era, it was considered very taboo to say, would you like breast or thigh?
Oh, so that makes sense.
Yeah, so they decided to say, okay, would you like white meat or dark meat of the chicken? So it was a very more
politically correct
way for that time period to say, would you like thigh or breast? That instead of saying thigh or breast. I got tongue tied there. But yeah, that is my unusual fact of the day. I give that to you, and that'll float around in your head from now on.
Yeah, it will, definitely.
But thanks again, Brenda, for coming on the show. I hope you had a good time. And do you want to tell people where they can find your podcast?
Well, Horrifying History can be found on any major podcast provider, and we release our episodes every Wednesday. So tomorrow, I think it's a little ironic what episode's coming out tomorrow, considering what we talked about and how women were like a fan club to Ted Bundy, because our episode is about the Children of God cult. And if you look into them, there's a lot of similarities between Ted Bundy and the leaders of that cult. You also can find on Facebook at Horrifying History, Instagram Horrifying_History, and on X at Horrifying HIST1.
Yeah, guys, give her a listen. Like, I've listened to a few episodes of hers, and it's a very awesome podcast. And it's funny you mentioned Children of God, because I think it was it Joaquin Phoenix? I forgot what celebrity actually grew up in the Children of God.
It was the Phoenixes and Rose McGowan.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. But wow, that's interesting. So again, guys, thanks for listening. Brenda, thanks for coming on the show. And don't forget to stay unusual, my friends.